All right, so let's start with the latest bit of information that has come in from Ukraine, where according to Ukrainian officials, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant has now been secured after there were reports of a fire that broke out at the plant in the early hours of Friday. The President Volodymyr Zelensky has in fact accused Russia of wanting to repeat the Chernobyl disaster, the accident that took place back in 1986 in the former erstwhile Soviet Union. The latest in this developing story, of course, is that the Ukrainian authorities have now said that the fire at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which happens to be Europe's largest nuclear plant, has now been brought under control. There are also reports by Ukrainian officials which say that the safety of the nuclear power plant has now been established. Now, from the early information that had come in, it was said that the reason why there was a fire at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant was because of the incessant Russian shelling at the nuclear facility. The Ukrainian authorities, including Foreign Minister Dmitry Kuleba, had urged the Russian troops to immediately stop the shelling to allow for firefighters to put out the blaze amidst warnings from the United Nations Atomic Watchdog Agency that there could be a very severe danger if the fire were to reach the plant's reactors. The IAEA had said that according to Ukraine, there is no change in the radiation levels at the nuclear plant for the time being. The United States President Joe Biden, in fact, spoke to the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky as the White House is said to be monitoring the situation. On Thursday, the Ukrainian authorities reported that Russian troops had stepped up their efforts to seize the plant and they had now entered into the town with tanks. The city on the Dnieper River accounts for almost about 25% of the country's power generation. The Zaporizhzhia plant accounts for almost about a quarter of Ukraine's power generation, and Russia has already captured the defunct Chernobyl power plant, which is about 100 kilometers north of the Ukrainian capital, Kiev. All right, now to get us the latest in terms of what is happening in terms of the situation in Ukraine and also the phone call that Volodymyr Zelensky has had with the American President Joe Biden. We're joined in by our correspondent Susan Tehrani, who's joining us live from New York. Now, Susan, this is a pretty concerning development in terms of how things have panned out. The Ukrainians claim that there was a fire at a nuclear facility, the largest in Europe that is presently in Ukraine. And this fire, we are given to understand, has now been brought under control. And President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine has also spoken with Joe Biden and has raised his concerns. What more do we know about this?
The president had been notified, and that's as far as we know, but the significance is that Volodymyr Zelensky did make that phone call to President Biden very soon after this incident, and it really does come after that press conference that Volodymyr Zelensky had with members of the press in Ukraine, and also really a plea not only to NATO member states, but the United States also being a NATO member, really calling for more military aid and calling for more planes to be sent to Ukraine for its defense. So yes, they did have that conversation, but also, the incident comes really almost less than a day after France's leader Macron said, quote unquote, the worst is yet to come. And here we are right now with this incident that's been claimed by the Ukrainians, shelling that had led to this fire reactor at the facility, at this nuclear facility that, as you mentioned, seems to be under control as of now. But the biggest really in Europe, as you said, and fears that it could really, if it had gone out of hand. And, it's very difficult to verify reports right now. Could have been worse than Chernobyl. But we do know that radiation levels, at least from the Ukrainian sides, as the Ukrainian foreign minister said, had been higher than normal and very concerning.
Absolutely, indeed. Do continue to stay on with us, Susan. Meanwhile, I'm told that we are also joined in by our correspondent, Ira Spitzer, who's joining us live in this broadcast. Ira, this of course, is a very concerning moment. According to the Ukrainian claims, the reason for the fire at this nuclear facility is because of Russian shelling onto the nuclear facility. In the phone call that Volodymyr Zelensky has had with Biden, he's asked for immediate assistance. How is the United States looking at all of this? Will there be any kind of an international response in trying to secure the Ukrainian nuclear facilities?
Well, certainly a very terrifying situation, not just for Ukraine, but for many countries in Europe and indeed around the world. Many people will remember the disaster at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Ukraine. It was the Soviet Union back then, but in 1986, which was this tremendous disaster, and it put elevated radiation levels into the surrounding areas. And now to see, just as this conflict has really taken hold over the past week, now just over a week into this conflict, to have the specter perhaps of some sort of nuclear incident is certainly scary, of course, for many people around the world. Now we're still trying to establish exactly what is going on here. It would appear that the Russian intention, or one could perhaps assume that the intention here, is to try and disable Ukrainian power facilities and infrastructure. But certainly when you talk about nuclear power and radiation, that is something that takes it to a very scary level that we haven't seen so far in this conflict, or in many conflicts around the world, because this is such a large nuclear plant, the home to the largest nuclear reactor in Europe.
Absolutely, indeed. And also there's the statement that's been put out by Volodymyr Zelensky, where he said, and I quote him here, "The Russian army has opened fire at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. No state except Russia has ever opened fire at a nuclear facility." Is this a part of a Russian strategy, Ira, do you think, to try and, turn off the electricity supplies for the Ukrainian grid? Because this nuclear power plant supplies almost about 25% of Ukrainian power. Is that a part of the strategy, or is there more to what we are looking at here?
Well, I think it would be a reasonable assumption to believe that this is a strategic move by Russian forces to try and disable Ukrainian electricity infrastructure leading up to this invasion. That was certainly something that many people had predicted would be part of the opening phase of this conflict. And in fact, many were surprised that we hadn't seen attacks and disabling of Ukrainian electricity services and power plants so far, or cyber attacks or other sort of tools that that Russia might have at its disposal. So it seems, one could surmise, I should say, that this attack could be related to a desire by Russia to try and carry that strategy forward.
All right, and do stay with us. But the statement that's been put out by the IAEA, it says that the essential equipment at the nuclear power plant has not been affected. So this is a fire that reportedly has been reported in one of the other peripheral buildings at the nuclear power facility, and not directly at a nuclear reactor site. This is the latest bit of information that has come in. And Susan, if I can bring you in on this, Ukraine has also been in touch with the IAEA. At this point of time, we're given to understand that there are a total of 15 nuclear facilities in Ukraine. And reports about this are conflicting, but about 4 of these nuclear facilities at least have already been taken over by the Russians. Do you think there'll be any kind of an international effort where the West would want the IAEA to get involved, so that at least the nuclear facilities, the security of them is guaranteed by a network of these nations that are bound by the IAEA?
Well, There are limits to what the IAEA can do generally with each country, and that's some of it includes, sending in inspectors and really coming up with some sort of agreement with member states of the international community. The problem right now is this is a conflict zone, and it's very difficult to monitor the activities that are happening in the country. So that's one aspect of it, and this is such a extraordinary situation right now that all hands are on deck. So the IAEA right now can perhaps put out statements. It can probably try to talk to the Russians on the one hand and perhaps advise the Ukrainians on the other and talk to the international community on the other. But beyond that, at this point, it's resources are very limited when it comes to the nuclear facilities in Ukraine and what it can do. What could be done, perhaps, is for the international community right now to rally around and perhaps figure out how they can stop the war machine of Vladimir Putin, and that would be one aspect of it. And a lot of Democrats and Republicans here in the United States agree is to cut off his access to selling oil and gas. So, that's right now, I think, would be the way that it would be headed towards right now at this point. But, to go and talk to organizations like the IAEA, it's hard to imagine if that would have any impact at this point.
All right, we'll have to leave there. Thank you very much indeed to Susan Tehrani and also to Ira Spitzer for joining us in this broadcast. This, of course, is a very concerning development where reports of a fire at arguably the biggest nuclear power plant in Europe caused because of Russian shelling. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.